Welcome to the Sharing the Faith podcast, where every other week we explore the beauty and power of faith in Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Now here is your host, Dr. Tom Neal.
Well, hello, everybody. Dr. Tom Neal here again for another episode of Sharing the Faith. It's a pleasure to be with you. And today I think out of all the guests I've had, this is my favorite guest that I've had. You are. Yeah, Austin Ashcraft is his name. And Austin and I have been friends for about, I think, 12, 13 years, something like that. And he's really, he's just a person in my life, not only who's a great friend, but who has deepened, expanded, brought alive my worldview in particularly unique ways that I think by the end of this podcast, you'll understand some of why that would be the case. If anyone gets to spend time with him in a sustained period of time, far more dangerous to spend with Austin. And then a decade is nearly a near-death experience to be with him. He takes you to the edge.
Which you love, near-death.
Which I do love near-death experiences. That's correct. So I'm going to introduce you to Austin Ashcraft here just by reading a bit of his bio here. And this comes from the website of the camp that he works for, Camp Rockmont in North Carolina. And this is how they describe him. Originally from South Carolina. No, he's not from South Carolina. Stop that. That is a mortal sin because he is from South Louisiana, baby. And that is a whole different animal. So originally from South Louisiana, Austin grew up spending his summers here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where he developed a great love for the outdoors and the transformational experiences that summer camp offers. He has a deep passion for working with young people and sharing his love of the outdoors while helping them push past barriers and boundaries they formerly perceived as impassable. Austin has served as an educator and outdoor professional for over a decade in various capacities. He has been a whitewater canoe instructor, a commercial Class 5 whitewater rafting guide. As a matter of fact, he took my daughters and I down a river, the Arkansas River in Colorado, which was a class what? It was like a class probably 0.2.
We were on like a class 3 section, yeah.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So it was utterly terrifying, but it was a good experience for me. He pushed the boundaries, and they were impassable after I went through them also, but he still pushed me, and it was a great moment. It really was for my daughters especially. So whitewater rafting guide, a high school theology and philosophy teacher, a football and rugby coach, a youth minister, and an outdoor adventure trip leader, leading both foreign and domestic trips for high school and college students that involved backcountry skiing, multi-day river expeditions, backpacking, mountaineering, and service to local communities and people in need, including serving with the Missionaries of Charity in Mexico, for example. Austin is a firm believer in the environment that Rockmont provides for campers to experience time away from screens, imagine that, and the noise of the world, genuine friendships with their peers and mentors, and newfound freedom to be comfortable in their own skin, all set in the backdrop of the beauty of the great outdoors. He believes this creates the perfect space for campers to encounter God and discover more about who he is calling each of them to be, so that they leave Rockmont with a greater love and passion for life and for serving those around them. And then lastly, Austin is grateful to live and work in such an incredible place and enjoys whitewater paddling, live music, time with friends and family, casual climbing and mountain biking, good seafood, and sleeping outside. And I have to say, sleeping outside, when I knew Austin, when I was teaching at Notre Dame Seminary and he was getting his master's degree there, Austin, and he was teaching at a high school and working as a youth minister on the North Shore of the Lake Pontchartrain. He lived outside in a tent for a winter by a river in Louisiana. So just knowing Austin is not, when you meet him, it's not an experience, it's an event. It happens to you. So, okay. So I had to build you up because
thank you, Tom.
The reality.
I don't know how I'm going to deliver on that.
Now, here you go. Now you got to deliver.
Having someone read your bio out loud. You just
Okay.
convinced me that I need to shorten that bio, so I'll immediately go do that after this.
That's right. That's right.
Entirely too long.
So I'd like to begin with a story, a particular story with Austin that has always, grabbed my imagination. And the name of I'm sorry, Austin, I'm going to have to ask you again, the name of the gorge. I should have written it down.
That's fine. Yeah, Linville Gorge.
Linville
In North
Gorge.
Carolina.
Linville Gorge. So this is a gorge in North Carolina, correct?
It is. Yeah,
Yes.
It's stunning. If you've seen the film The Last of the Mohicans, that's where it was filmed.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Very beautiful.
Very cool. So one time Austin texted me a photograph of these young men that he had been hiking with. And it was before sunrise. He'd hiked up with them in the dark and got there in time to the peak to be there for sunrise. And he did an exercise with them. And that's what he texted me. He had them go up to the top and they sat along the gorge ridge there and looked toward the east at the sunrise. And he asked them for 3 minutes to be completely silent and just to listen. And then at the end of that 3 minutes, he'd ask them what they heard. And he texted me and he said, I did this. And after those 3 minutes, he said, I said to them, what did you hear? And the first answer from one of the young men was, I hear beauty. And I'll never forget that. As a matter of fact, when I've given talks and I have PowerPoints, I've used that screenshot of that text.
Oh, wow.
Again and again and again, because to talk about the power of silence, the power of nature, adventure, and then trusting people enough to be able to hear something that we don't think anymore people can hear. So maybe you just talk about what's the philosophy you have behind that whole thing you did with those young men, things that you do so often. What stands behind that?
Sure. I think, the outdoors and nature is perhaps the greatest teacher. As an educator myself, and you as an educator, I think the creative world that we live in can teach us more than any lecture or any book we could ever read, if only we trust it to do that. Mm-hmm. And if only we trust the people we're working with to be able to receive that and not have to feel like we have to force something in there, which is what I would have done probably in my younger days. I would have gone immediately into a teaching or something like that. But just an open-ended question of allowing people to articulate their own experience as they've perceived it. And I think young people get a bad rep these days for being a lot of things anxious and shallow and unable to have meaningful experiences. And I think that's undeserved. And I think it's largely on us as adults, not giving them the space to be able to have those experiences and plumb the depths, which are certainly there. And that was a really powerful experience of that for me. I was pretty blown away by that answer. And I think we just sat in silence for a little bit after that answer, to be honest, just kind of the profundity of what it is to hear beauty.
Yes.
Coming from a bunch of 15 and 16-year-old guys who, often aren't given that opportunity and resort to sitting on their phones and sitting inside, and the chance to bring them outside and allow them to experience that wasn't really anything I did other than just create a space where that could happen. But it's not rocket science, and it doesn't take a degree to be able to guide people in those experiences. It's interesting. The more I feel like I've learned and studied and read and, gone on to, get my master's under brilliant minds such as Tom Neal himself. The more I've educated myself, the more I've realized it's just not that complicated, because we live in a world which speaks all the time, if only we'll let it. And not just in the beautiful outdoors of a place like Linville Gorge, which is stunning, but also in the concrete jungle of New York, or wherever anyone might find themselves, or an encounter with a person on the street or a barista behind a counter, that God is always speaking to us. Life is always speaking to us through everyday encounters, but we often don't take the time to process that. And young people haven't been shown how to do that often. And so to give them the chance to do that so they can take those tools into their own life, to incorporate silence and those types of reflections is something I really believe in. I wouldn't say that's my whole philosophy, but that's, I don't know, a part of it.
Absolutely, it is. And I think, and I think from what you're saying there and just my experience of you and your teaching methodology is, you have a real trust that these young people have the capacity, the ability to see things that are profound, that are meaningful in life, that adults might not think that they are capable of or even interested in, but they don't give them the space to do that. And I think one of the things in the classroom, for example, when you taught high school, was you gave them the opportunity to risk going places with their thought that maybe other teachers would shut down quickly or say that's not the correct answer, but you gave them the space, the ability to be able to just, to be willing to say something that might be off, and then you could help them kind of think from there, where to go next. And I think that wild kind of wilderness kind of experience of the uncontrolled and letting them kind of experience that themselves and being okay with that and being at peace with that and seeing what can come out of it is, for me, is what you really bring, and that experience brings in beauty. And I just want to just jump here quickly, and I don't want to talk too much. I feel like I'm talking too much here, but the risk thing, this the risk thing that you do. So climbing mountains, pushing young men or any of the people that you go with, like myself, to the boundaries, right? To places we didn't think we could cross or were afraid to cross, or confronting fears. And, we've talked about this before. There's a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, which is really a very,
go read it if you haven't.
It really, exactly. Go read it if you haven't. It's compelling, and it's frightening, and it's enlightening and compelling. But there's an interview in a magazine I read with him, and I want to read the interviewer's question, and I want to read his response, and then just have you just kind of riff on that, just jump off of that and talk about your experience with young people and then what you're doing to try to respond to that. So the interviewer says, talking about his book, "This reminded me of the part of the book that discusses the decline in ER visits, particularly among boys, because they're not outside engaging in risky play as much. So does this indicate that, in a way, we might want some more broken bones? Not for their own sake, of course, but as indicators that kids are outside taking some risks that might get them hurt, but not permanently, but that are important for development." And then Haidt says, "That's right. So suppose you're running an elementary school and you have a playground, and someone asks you, what is the optimal number of injuries per year at your school?" I love that. "Injuries serious enough that it has to go beyond the school nurse. And my contention is that the optimum number is not 0. It's not going to be high. I wouldn't want 10 or 20, but if no one is getting injured, probably things are too safe, because children need risk. They literally need risk. And when we deprive them of risk, we're preventing them from overcoming their anxieties and learning how to manage risk." So talk about that. Talk about that world with the young people that you meet all the time.
Yeah. I could talk about that for a while. I'm actually in a hotel room, as you can see. This is not my own decor in my house.
I wanted people to think this was your room. You shouldn't have said that.
I'm exposed. I'm at a conference right now for camp owners and directors. And so it's interesting you bring that up. It's what I've been seeped in the past 3 days, just talking about this. And someone was talking and presenting yesterday just on young people and anxiety. And they said something effective like anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of your resources or ability to deal with it.
Wow.
And, yeah, pretty profound. And I think that, we have done that. We have overestimated problems and made everything into an emergency or a crisis, and we've underestimated young people's abilities to deal with those problems. And I feel like we as adults have put a lot of anxiety on them because of that, because we haven't empowered them to allow them to realize that they're so much more capable than they think they are, than we think they are. And what a great tragedy that is, and disservice we're doing to young people, and not allowing them to take risks, and not allowing them to fail. And a lot of parents are putting this anxiety on their children. And there was a speaker yesterday who was sharing about kids raised by anxious parents. They find the world as a more dangerous place, and they lose the ability to assess reasonable risk. And so the idea of taking people out into the outdoors and things that perceive in the moment as like dangerous or risky situations, such as jumping off of cliffs into rivers, as you experienced, or climbing the side of mountains and feeling the exposure of, man, I'm on the side of a mountain right now. And that's a normal human physiological response, to feel this is kind of scary. And that's a really good thing to feel, because you can work through that and you can be able to process those emotions and those responses like, okay, my body's telling me like to go down, that I can't do this, but then you can put one step in front of the other and another step and another step. And it's something I talk about a lot when I'm leading these trips, doing mountaineering or climbing a summit, that it's entirely too intimidating to think about the whole journey of getting to the top. And especially in mountaineering, when you're at high altitude and you're deprived of oxygen because you're at 19,000 feet. And so your brain isn't functioning super well, and it's telling you it's overreacting. And again, rightfully so. It's a good physiological response and is innate within us for right reasons. But to be able to just push through that, and I'm just going to take the next step, and then I'm going to take another one, and then I'm going to take another one. That's all you can really see. It's a really good metaphor for life. So that when you encounter things that are challenging and difficult, and that scare you and that are risky, you know that you're capable of dealing with them because you've been there before, in a different way. It's a different thing climbing a mountain than going through a breakup or getting fired from a job or not making a sports team in high school or conflict with friends or whatever it might be. But I think parents are doing children and young people a great disservice when, again, they don't allow them to experience any of this risk. The second they have any type of tension with their friend in third grade, the parent is going to step in and call the other parent or call the teacher, and you've got to fix this, as opposed to letting kids sort it out themselves. And they're pretty good at that. And we don't believe they are, but they are. They're remarkably anti-fragile, both in a physiological sense. Their bones are malleable, especially like in infants, we see that, right? But if a kid breaks his arm as a 10-year-old, it's going to heal pretty quick, and that's a metaphor, I think, for life. It's going to teach us something. Or if he has an adverse experience, where he's not invited to something and he feels left out, like he can handle that, and work through that pretty quickly. But we're not allowing them the chance to do that, right? We're removing any type of adversity or challenge or risk from them. And I think what Jonathan Haidt is speaking about there, like the playground is symbolic of that, the physical risk that he's speaking of not being injured, because we're not allowing them to go on the monkey bars or whatever it might be, because we're so terrified of anything that might happen to them. We're doing them a great disservice, and we're passing on our anxiety to them, as opposed to letting them play. And someone's going to fall and scrape up their knee. Someone's going to fall and maybe break a wrist. But they're going to learn a lot through that. And they're going to learn they can recover from things, that they can go through adversity. Adversity is a tremendous gift. And if we're taking that away from people, especially from young people, at a time where their brains are developing and they're trying to understand the world and how to interact with it, we're doing them a great disservice. And so I'm very grateful to be able to provide a space, in a place like a summer camp and with the outdoors, which are a great teacher, to allow kids to realize that they're a lot more resilient and a lot more capable than they think they are.
Yes.
Which can hopefully help them in other areas of their life. And I'm pretty convinced that it does. So.
Absolutely. And to add, Austin, to add into that conversation, it's the same idea, but different word, the word failure. I remember that Cornel West once saying, you got to risk, fail, risk again, fail better. So in other words, you realize that failure will be a repeated experience in life. But when you allow failure to be better, it opens something different, which is you realize that failure is a part of life. So maybe that language of failure, well, for yourself or for the young people that you work with, helping them to see failure as well, how would you help them to see it in this same constructive way?
Yeah, well, I think we obviously come from a tradition which has a very, very rich theology of failure.
Yes.
And portrayal of failure. Our whole religion is built on failure, which unfortunately, I think is often looked over today in the way that Christianity or Catholicism, Christianity in general, is presented in the West, is often seen as a way to improve your life. It's another helpful self-improvement thing. It's another way to get people to follow the rules. As opposed to, it's another way to win, right? If you do this, you'll win. And obviously the prosperity gospel is a dramatic version of that, but I think it's much more laden in most messages that are preached on Sundays about, this is the way that you win as a Christian. And Christianity was born out of failure. A man who came to try and so hard to deliver a message, and the people that he poured into for 3 years and dedicated his life to didn't get it.
Yes.
And he was ultimately killed for it. And a church which was built on failure, on, the one that he entrusted to lead the church, and being Peter, failed drastically in the moment where he needed him most. For some reason, we don't talk about that. But we have an incredible tradition there, and there's a lot that our faith has to offer us in that regard. And being a Christian camp, we're able to really press into that and allow kids to see it's okay to fail. It's okay to try the rock wall and not make it up all the way to the top. And that's a good thing. And sometimes I'll get some pushback from staff members or parents of like, oh, well, can't you just make this or that easier? And we could, but we'd be doing them a disservice if they never get the chance to fail and never get the chance to come back and try something again. I think that those two things go hand in hand, that avoidance of failure and that avoidance of risk.
Yes.
And we need them both. We need to allow people to take risks and to fail. So they can realize it's not the end of the world when it happens. It feels like it is, whatever the issue may be. It can feel like your whole world is collapsing in, but you will make it through, and you'll become so much stronger and so much more capable and ready to take on whatever's next and really have a leg up in a sense. And that, for me, that's what summer camp did in such a profound way growing up, is it gave me those opportunities to take risks and to fail, and to learn that that's okay. And I was supported along the way by people who cared about me and showed me how to fail and showed me that that's okay. And I think the gift of failure is that in a bigger sense in life, as they grow up and fail in other ways, fail in endeavors or professionally or personally in relationships, and mess up as we all do. I think we need to normalize failure, and we need to normalize risk taking, because what failure does, it gives us a great gift. Again, in the eyes of faith, it allows the illusions to fade away, that we have it all together, or that we're supposed to have it all together, or it allows the false illusion of control that we think we have over our life to fail away, and it allows our ego to be broken. I need a lot more failure in my life. My ego can be more broken. But what a great gift that is, again, that we're depriving people for not giving them the chance to do it if we're bubble wrapping everything and every experience from the age of 1 onward.
That's powerful, by the way. The whole reflection there is powerful, but particularly, again, connecting it to risk, that you live a very safe life so that you never risk failure, right? I'm not going to fail because I'll always make sure that what I do, I know already I can do well, which means I'm not going to push myself to a new area.
Yeah.
But the other thing you said, which is, when you experience failure, you know that you don't have to do this alone. You have other people who care about you that you can rely on to help you. And I think, part of it for me is breaking the myth of the self-sufficient man or woman, right? The person who can do it all themselves, and that, having to rely on others is simply a sign that you don't have what it takes, or a weakness. It's not the ideal is not to rely on others, is to be self-sufficient. And I think, what you said, and just the experiences you and I have shared so many times about the profound awareness of our need for others, to make it through. And this is where I'll mention just, so Austin, as I said, took my daughters and I back in 2020. We went on a road trip, and we ended up in southern Colorado. It's not Buena Vista. How do they pronounce it there?
Buena Vista.
I love that. Good Mexican pronunciation there. Yes. Buena Vista, Colorado, which is where the Whitewater Rapids. What was the name of the place you worked at again?
I worked at River Runners, one of the many outfitters on the Arkansas River, and we went through Browns Canyon. I took you through Browns Canyon, which is a national monument.
That's right.
Yeah,
it was beautiful. Well, I had never been whitewater rafting, and we did it because we wanted to see Austin. My daughters wanted to see Austin. The trip was for Catherine, my daughter, for her graduation from high school. It was a gift. And then she wanted her sister to come, which was wonderful, her sister Maria. So the three of us went, and we spent about 2 weeks together driving through. It was an incredible experience. But we went there, and they were so excited to do the whitewater rafting. They'd always wanted to do it, and I always didn't want to do it. I never wanted to do it. At least in my later adult life, when I developed an anxiety disorder, really around the age of about probably 24 or so. I'd had anxiety issues since my early childhood. What were clearly panic attacks I would have when I was little because of things that were going on at home. And probably about 24 years old or so, I started to have like crippling anxiety attacks, and landed me in the hospital. And anyway, years down the line, I've struggled with that for years and years. And so when I go to things like this experience that Austin had invited us to, and I think about the uncertainty of it and the risks and all of that, the physical risks, and just being on a river, and then being where okay, I'm on a raft, and then I can't get off. And what if I have to get off and I start having a panic attack? And, so then I all of a sudden start saying, well, I can't do it. So I went through all of this inside of me, the weeks leading up to it, the days leading up to it. Didn't let anyone know about it. Never said a word to my daughters. No one would have known, literally, because I thought I'm gonna just deal with this. And so came to the day, and then we're there, and we got into the whitewater, into the raft, and began going down. It was nice and smooth from the beginning. And then we started getting in the first whitewater rapids. And I was like, okay, this is, so anyway, so we're going down, and I'm feeling some of the symptoms happening already of anxiety attack. We have the difficulty breathing, the chest tightness in the chest, and that sense of, of fear. So we get to this one place where we stop and we kind of step out and we go up on top of this little ledge. And then everyone's jumping off the ledge down into the water. And I'm looking at that thing and I'm going, I'm not going to do that to myself. And then Austin says to me, come on, Tom. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to face my fear. So I went up, and I'm so glad I did, by the way. I went up and I jumped into the water. The water was really cold, and my just breathing froze up, and I just felt the panic, right? The whole kind of panic, and it just set in motion a full scale panic attack. And then I think it was shortly after that, we stopped for lunch off of this place down the way. And I'm like, I'm so good at this. I've been doing this for decades. I'm so good. No one would know on the outside. I mean, I'm sure Austin could tell to some extent, but I'm holding it together, but I feel like I'm going to completely come apart. And it was terrible. So we get off and we get onto the place to have lunch. And I walk up, and the girls, we sit down, and I just say, hey, I got to go, over here. And I don't know what I said. I have to go back there. I have to go back there and just like, get my breath and try and calm down. So I did. And so I said to them, I have to go back there. And then Catherine looks at me and she says, Dad, are you okay? And I looked at her and I didn't know how to answer it. And then Maria, my daughter, says, Dad, you don't have to be strong for us. We can handle it. Are you okay? And I just started to cry. And so I broke down and I said, okay, now I got to go back there. And I went back there and I sobbed.
Miles of river left.
What?
So we still had miles of river to go.
Miles of river left to go. And exactly. And I sobbed. But it was like one of those threshold moments of my life journey with anxiety, particularly, because it made me realize what you said, which is A, the risk and the anxiety associated with that, how that works. But B, the fact that the only way I've come to deal with it is to have no one else help me, not to talk to anyone else about it, keep it under complete control.
Wow.
And my daughters were able to break that open for me. And then after that, it was still there, but it subsided, and then it was gone at the very end. And so I guess I use that as an example from a personal experience between us of you living that out in the way that you do what you do and leading people to those moments that did that for me and my daughters and made me see that moment of failure where I was wrecking my daughter's whitewater rafting trip, but they didn't see it that way because this is what life is. Like, show me who you are. You're weak. You're afraid. You're having an anxiety attack. We love you, So anyway, so just to mention that it's real. I can tell you from the inside.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's it's a normal experience, to be afraid of something you don't know, of whitewater rapids when you don't have experience in that. And, I did, you didn't. And again, I think these are all things like which we just need to normalize as opposed to blowing them out of proportion or saying we've just got to remove them entirely. No risk, no failure, no uncertainty, no discomfort, because you can choose to place yourself in those circumstances as you did as a mature adult, understanding that, this is uncertain and I'm afraid, but I'm going to step into it anyways. But the problem, I think that we're bringing the alarm bell on, and especially John Heidi's a great voice in this regard, is that, parents are taking these things away, these opportunities away from their children. And then they end up just totally incapable of dealing with life because we have unnormalized uncertainty and discomfort and risk. And we've got to normalize them again, specifically for children, because they're at the age where their brains can handle it, and we don't think they can.
Yes.
And yes, we've got to normalize uncertainty. It's okay to be uncertain, to not know anything about your future plans for whatever might be coming down the road for you. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, to experience some discomfort, and to normalize those things and give young people language to talk through them and to work through them, as opposed to just removing the situations entirely. I think a lot of young people are getting left behind, and it's a really sad thing. And I see that happening. And, I still, obviously I run the summer camp and get to work with a lot of young people that way, but I also help out with Young Life at the high school down the road. And I see the way a lot of particularly young boys are getting left behind is really concerning to me. Their parents and their mothers especially seem much more willing to and I was just talking with a group of camp directors yesterday morning about this, that, obviously our camp is all boys, but some camps are co-ed, and they're really struggling with enrollment for their boy campers because their moms are willing to send off their girls and hey, they're ready. I want to empower them. But when it comes to sending off their boys, they're like, no, they're not ready for that. At the age of 7 or at the age of 15, and we see that happening in so many ways. And not to go off on that tangent, but in college enrollments, it used to be closer to 50-50. Now it's 60-40 in the country of women to men. And, boys aren't launching when they become young men. They're staying at home and living with their parents and getting a retail job somewhere in town. And, because the anxiety is too overwhelming, or they're just not prepared. And, that's problematic.
It's problematic.
Yeah. So
it's very problematic.
Yeah.
So, we have I can't believe we only have 10 minutes left. That was incredibly fast. We need to do this a number of more times, by the way. We're just starting here. Yeah. Let me just ask one thing at the end, Austin, to open this out into faith, just here at the end a bit,
sure.
Which is, the risk of reality, risking reality. That would be a great blog, by the way. I was thinking of naming a blog, Risking Reality. Do you think that's a good one? Risking reality. So faith calls us to this just supreme sense of risk, and of risking failure. And I think of St. Paul, of course, his well-worn exchange with Jesus, where he asks Jesus to remove this thorn from his flesh, whatever that is. And then Jesus says, my grace is sufficient, for power is made perfect in weakness. Yeah. And so faith, the things you do with these young men, helps them to develop at the natural level a willingness to step out, to test the boundaries, to risk, to extend themselves. So how does that help these young men to be able to enter into what faith really is? How would you connect those two?
Yeah, we could talk about this for.
I know we could. So this is the launching pad to the next podcast. So just give me a taste of what the next podcast would be about, which is the risk of faith. So in what way do you think doing these things, and that's just not your camp, but just think that what I did or what people just do in life, day-to-day things.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot of ways
to
come at this. You and I talk about this a lot. I think there's such an obsession today in faith context and in ministry context with the right answers. And things that are very comprehensible and straightforward. And a lot of ministries are centered around that because it's really attractive, right? I can go and present the gospel to someone very clearly with this formula, and say, hey, you can come follow Jesus, and this is what it'll look like, and lay out the steps. And this is how you achieve spiritual success and financial success and optimize everything along the way. Join our movement. And it's really clear. And people want things that are clear. We as humans, obviously, ambiguity is tough. And so we're drawn to those things. And those ministries are also very often very quote unquote successful, and have large numbers because they lay things out very clearly. But I think they're setting people up for devastation. And you and I have seen that, right, in so many ways. And the ways that people ultimately feel burned by that approach to faith and life and philosophy. It doesn't offer sufficient answers to the complexities of life, the nuances of faith, and the tough reality of suffering that we face. And we've lost the fact that suffering and failure are at the center of our faith. And we try and whitewash that a bit, or at least soften the blow by very straightforward answers and apologetics. And so something I learned back in grad school from you that was super helpful in that distinction was that maybe your listeners might find interesting. I don't know if you talked about it before, but the distinction between apophatic and the cataphatic way. Have you talked about that before on this podcast? I don't know.
No.
Well, would you mind you could articulate it better than me?
Sure. Yes.
Seconds.
Yeah, sure. So the cataphatic and apophatic way in theology, cataphatic means literally the way of saying or affirmation. In other words, we say what God is. We know God is this. God is just. God is good. God is one. God is kind. God is a father, and so on. And then the apophatic way is where we unsay what we just said. God is trustworthy, but not as we understand trustworthiness. God is faithful, but not as we understand fidelity. In other words, we unsay the fact that, yes, it's true that God is those things, but God is those things in a way that is ultimately beyond our ability to comprehend. It escapes our ability to create a nice, tidy box in which we can say, this is what it means for God to be just, and justice works out this way in his providence. And if it doesn't work out that way, then I'm out, because we didn't allow the kind of expansiveness of mystery to stand. We wanted to make it nice and clear and distinct. So that's the idea.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a really freeing realization for me. And as I've told you before, I, in many ways, is a product of the more modern approach to evangelization and faith, I think, that we find in the West today. And when I encountered you, I was at a breaking point, and was really on the verge of losing my faith because I didn't have the space to deal with the ambiguity of life that I was finding. What I'd previously understood was crumbling against the reality of my lived experience, right? And and I didn't have any context for that. And luckily, you helped give me that context, along with some other experiences and very wonderful people. And I'm obviously forever grateful for that. But to tie that back to, the whole risk thing is, it's a lot more difficult to present that model, I guess, from the get-go, because it's not quite as attractive. It doesn't offer a very clear-cut presentation of faith and life, but it's one that ultimately is worth the risk. And again, do we trust the God who created us? Do we trust the humanity itself to be able to handle the fullness of the truth of who God is and the mystery of who God is, as opposed to trying to present a really clear version that has all the answers and can win any argument, because then I can get you on my side and sign you up to donate monthly to my cause or whatever it might be. But ultimately, the greater risk is to not to allow for that uncertainty. Whether it's the uncertainty of all these things are so interrelated, of not knowing what it's like to be on a Class 3 whitewater river, the uncertainty of not being able to wrap my hands around what or who God is. Either way, we have to normalize it, and uncertainty is the path forward. And we have to learn to live in that tension, and not try and resolve it with easy answers, because ultimately those don't work, and they either lead to really dangerous expressions of faith, which is a whole nother podcast, as we've talked about before, or a total loss of it. And both of those are real tragedies. And yeah, so I think we have to take risks both in life and in theology. And in formation, we have to be willing to take the risk of trusting that all of this is ultimately God's responsibility and not ours. Having some humility before the mystery of who God is and the mystery of the journey of another person without the temptation to control it in the way that we see fit. And yeah, that humility, I think, is the only path forward. Not that I've certainly figured it out by any means, but I'm working towards it. And if I could just end with one story that just popped in my head.
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah. Go do it. That'd be perfect to end with.
Theologian, my favorite theologian, probably, or at least top three, is Luigi Giussani. Who we talked about at length, Italian theologian, started a communal liberation movement in Italy. But one of my favorite stories about him is he worked with young people kind of back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And there was in Italy mostly, but he did some international work. But there was an Italian mother who was worried about her son because he was interested in communism at the time. And she was worried he's going to lose his faith. And so she calls Father Giussani in a panic, you need to come and save my son and fix him. And so she invites him over for dinner, and he comes to dinner and brings a big box, a gift. And at the end of dinner, he, and the son's, of course, like, who's this priest guy that my mom invited over? And, he says to the young man, the teenage guy, he's like, hey, it's a really big decision that you've taken to explore these other ideas. And I think it's a real sign of maturity that you're interested in these things. So I brought you a gift to kind of honor this moment of exploration in your life. And he opens the box, and it's all of these communist texts, from the Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx and tons of other texts. It was like 5 or 6 books. He said, if you think this is true, then I want you to read it and test it against your own experience. And see if it's true. And, I want you to read all these texts, and I'm happy to meet with you as you read them or as you finish them or after you finish all of them, and we can talk through it and see if it resonates with your human experience. And of course, the mom's just like freaking out, panicking. But I think that was his genius and the real genius of faith. And he bet on the human heart in the same way that Christ did in his apostles. And Peter, he bet on the human heart of Peter, even though he was a total failure. And it doesn't seem like the best bet if we're looking at it from just a human and finite perspective. And it can often seem like a failure to place that bet, because that bet often, quote unquote, fails from our eyes or our perspective, but not from the perspective of Christ and the incarnation. He's forever changed the human heart. And so we can bet on it, even when it doesn't make sense to us, and take that risk. Even when we don't see the payoff, or when we think, again, from our perspective, the risk goes sideways, the risk is worth it.
So excellent. That was a perfect story to end with, by the way. Wow, this is so we're going to continue. So we're going to jump into this. I would love to go deeper into that question of faith next time on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really would. Yeah, that this is marvelous. And I'll end with this. It reminds me of I used to teach at the Institute for Priestly Formation in the summers up in Omaha. And one of the things they do in that program is they teach these men to pray in a new way, kind of, they use Ignatian methods of prayer. And this one young man gave a testimony at the end of the whole summer and said, that what changed his whole life really in this summer was teaching him to pray in a way that was no longer under control. He says, the first time I've ever prayed in a way that I was not completely in control of the experience of prayer. I completely learned, contemplative prayer is the experience of surrendering control of the prayer experience and allowing it to be what it is. And he said, and then his image he used, and I'll end with this. He said, I realized one day I finally let the Lion of Judah out of his cage, because I've always had him caged safely inside of me. And he said, that's what I want my priesthood to be. My priesthood to be the free Lion of Judah to work through me. So may that be the case for you and for me, for those who listen to us. And if people want to get in touch with you about your work, reach out to you to discuss this, what will be the best way?
Great question.
Your website at Rockmount?
Sure. Yeah. Rockmount website, or the old Risking Reality blog that
Risking Reality.
Don't update anymore.
Is it Risking Reality WordPress, or what is it?
Yeah, it's WordPress. I think it's riskinreality.wordpress.com. I believe would
that's
be
right.
Yeah.
So they can get a hold of you.
Maybe I'll jot some of these ideas down.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for this time together, Austin.
Always a joy, my friend.
Always.
Thank you. It's great to see you.
You too. Until the next time. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this another edition of Sharing the Faith. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I'll be back again in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, may the Lord bless you abundantly.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Sharing the Faith podcast. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit ptdiocese.org/sharingthefaith. If you listen to the audio version through an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe, or leave a comment on the episode. Thank you for listening.